My name is Anthony Bennett. I am 84 years old, and only now, sitting in this room in Brighton where every object smells of the presence that is no longer here, have I begun to understand what true love is. It's late. I know it's late. But this story needs to be told, because perhaps you still have time. I met Daisy on a June afternoon in 1963 at the St. Joseph's Parish dance in the St. Agnes neighborhood. She wore a sand-colored dress and laughed with her head slightly tilted as if the whole world were amusing. I was confident, hard-working, and believed I knew exactly what a woman needed: security, a roof over her head, and a man who wouldn't let her down. I approached her with all that certainty, and she looked at me with those large brown eyes and said I seemed like someone who needed to learn to slow down. I laughed. I thought it was a compliment. We got married in March of the following year, in a simple ceremony at the same parish. She carried flowers from her mother's garden, white daisies, as if she already knew her name was also a prophecy of delicacy. My family approved. Hers did too. And I entered that marriage as I entered everything in life, determined, organized, with a plan. The plan was simple: to work at the manufacturing plant where my father had worked before me, to climb the ranks, build our own house, raise our children with discipline, and offer Daisy what I considered the highest level of love: stability. My father taught me that a man who loves doesn't cry, doesn't complain, doesn't stand still. A man who loves solves problems, fixes things, provides. I carried that lesson as if it were my personal Bible. In the first few years, we lived in a rented little house on Holly Street, a crooked property with a leak in the hallway and a squeaky door. Daisy loved that house. She said the squeak of the door was the sound of home welcoming you. I only saw the need to replace the hinge. I would replace it, she would smile, and I believed that was caring. When our son Edward was born in 1966, I focused even more on my mission: bills, savings, promotions. I woke up before 6, arrived home after 8 at night. Daisy often waited up for me, with dinner on the table and a desire to talk that I always put off for later. Later turned into tomorrow. Tomorrow turned into always. She wanted to talk about her day, about a book she was reading, about a conversation she had at the bakery with Mrs. Connie, about a song she heard on the radio that made her cry without really knowing why. I listened half-heartedly, answered in monosyllables, and thought I was present because my body was in the same room as hers. There was a complaint she repeated from time to time, never in an argumentative tone, always with that gentleness that disarmed me. She would say, "You are here, but you are not with me." I felt wronged every time. I thought, I'm paying the rent, I'm here at home, I'm not out on the streets or getting drunk. What more does she want? I never asked. I never truly asked. When Edward was about 12, the first frictions between us began. He was different from me, sensitive, artistic. He liked to draw and spent hours talking with his mother in the kitchen. I thought he was being weak when he preferred to stay home, rather than play football with the neighborhood boys. My father had taught me that a man needs toughness to survive, and I tried to teach that to Edward in the only way I knew: demands, expectations, and an absence of praise. Daisy was different. She kept his drawings in a folder with a pink ribbon. She praised every line, every color. I observed that with discomfort, thinking she was raising him without firmness. Today I understand that she was raising someone capable of seeing the beauty of the world, something I never learned in time. Edward left home at 18. He moved to London, said he needed space. There was a nasty argument before that, one of those that remain etched in memory like a scar that aches in the cold. I said things I shouldn't have. He responded in the same tone. Daisy stood between us, in silence, with that look that took me decades to learn to read. It was pain. It was love. It was the woman who loved them both and couldn't save either from themselves. For a long time, communications with Edward were sparse. A phone call here, a Christmas card there. I never took the first step. I let pride occupy the space where love should have been. Daisy never stopped talking about our son. She would ask about him in the few conversations we had at night. I would answer vaguely, and the subject would die before it could breathe. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The years passed as they do for those not paying attention, quickly and silently. Our other children grew up, married, and gave us grandchildren who would visit during holidays and fill the house with noise for a few days. Then the silence would return. For me, it was rest. For Daisy, it was an echo. When I retired, she organized a small celebration right here in this room. She invited our neighbor, Mrs. Louise, prepared a lemon drizzle cake, and hung a yellow balloon in the window. I looked at it and thought it was excessive. I sat down, ate the cake, thanked her, and went to check the finances for the following month. She stayed in the room with Mrs. Louise for another hour. I heard the two of them laughing from afar and didn't join in. I thought they needed space. In truth, it was I who needed to learn to occupy space. We started walking together in the mornings along Ring Road Avenue. She observed the trees, the neighbors' dogs, the color of the sky on that specific day. She commented on everything with the animation of someone discovering the world each morning. I thought about how much it would cost to fix the rusted gate, and if my back pain would worsen with the approaching cold. When she held my hand, I allowed it, but I left my hand limp without squeezing back, believing there would be many other mornings to hold her hand firmly. It was on one of those mornings that she stopped in front of a rose bush that had sprouted on an abandoned wall on Willow Lane and said, "Look, Anthony, look how beautiful." I glanced for 2 seconds and resumed my pace. She stood still for another moment, alone before that beauty I refused to share. I only understood that later, much later. When Daisy turned 72, doctors found something that changed the rhythm of everything, a chronic condition that required attention, care, adaptation. I organized myself as I always did in the face of a problem. I researched, set up medication schedules, cut prohibited items from her diet, and transformed the household routine into a logistical operation of care. I thought I was loving in the best way I knew how. She thanked me profusely, with that gentle, tired smile that told me she saw my effort. But at night, when we turned off the light, she would hold my hand tighter than usual, and I would return the squeeze, turn on my side, and fall asleep. Only much later did I understand what she meant with that squeeze. "I'm scared. Stay here with me. Don't leave me alone, even when you're by my side." I didn't know how to listen to what her hands were saying. I never learned that language. One afternoon, while we were looking through photo albums, she found a faded image of us both laughing by the roadside. She recounted that day we had gotten lost on the way to the Brighton Reservoir and ended up having lunch at a blue-doored restaurant on Elm Street which no longer existed. She said it had been the best mistake of our lives. I barely remembered. She observed my expression and spoke with that calm that always disarmed me. "You remembered the big events, Anthony. I remembered the detours, and the detours were where we truly lived." I stayed quiet. Something inside me began to crack, slowly, like old wood giving way under the weight of moisture. I felt there was a greater truth in those words than I was ready to bear at that moment. I carefully closed the album, got up to fetch some water, and didn't return to the subject. I think I was afraid of understanding too late what she had been telling me for 59 years. There was an afternoon when Daisy's strength gave way in a manner I was unprepared to witness. It wasn't sudden. It was like the light fading before dusk, slow, gentle, inevitable. She stopped going to the library where she volunteered. The back garden, which she cultivated with a tenderness I never knew how to imitate, became disorderly, with the seedlings growing wherever they pleased. I looked at it and saw mess. She looked and said that plants also needed freedom. I started cooking. I was never one for the kitchen, but I learned out of obligation what I should have learned out of love. Her seasonings never tasted the same in my hands. The rice lacked that scent of golden garlic that she made sure to leave distinct in the kitchen. She tasted everything I prepared and said it was good. I knew she was lying gently. She knew I knew. And we both continued that delicate game of sparing each other. At night, when the silence of the house grew heavier, we began to talk in a different way. She spoke of the past with a tenderness that enveloped and saddened me at the same time. She spoke of the little house on Holly Street, of the squeaky door, of the day Edward took his first steps and fell on top of the cat we had back then. She laughed with her eyes closed, as if seeing the scene unfold again. I listened with an attention I was learning to have too late. "One of those nights," she said. "You never learned to rest within love, Anthony. You were always on guard, protecting, planning, solving, but rarely simply being." I looked at her with no answer. She didn't say it with anger. She said it with the serenity of someone who had spent decades understanding something the other had not yet grasped. And it was that serenity that broke me inside. When an infection took her to St. Jude's Hospital here in Brighton, I went with her as I always did for any important task, ready, firm, organized. But sitting by that bedside, looking at her in the cold hospital light on her face, I began to see things I had never seen before. The scar on her left wrist she'd had since a bicycle fall before we met. The slightly crooked fingers on her right hand, which she said were her grandmother's inheritance. The soft lines that time had drawn at the corners of her eyes, which were the mark of 60 years of smiles I should have provoked more often. She asked me with that low, serene voice, "Don't wait to see me, Anthony. See me now." For the first time in my life, I stopped. I didn't try to solve anything. I didn't pick up my phone to research medical protocols. I just stayed there, truly present, holding her hand with both arms, and began to recall everything I had filed away in the back of my memory without giving it due value. The blue-doored restaurant, the October light streaming through the living room curtain, her laughter when we got lost on that road, and I pretended to be annoyed while she was already enchanted by the mistake. I confessed that many times I had looked without seeing. She responded without accusation, with that generosity I never understood how she managed to maintain after everything. "You loved me as you knew how, Anthony." That was not little, and that broke me in a way no words of mine can properly describe. Because I understood in that instant that loving as I knew how was not loving as she needed, and that there was an enormous difference between the two things. Daisy passed away a few weeks later, on a quiet dawn, as I held her hand. The world didn't stop. The street below continued with its noises, the neighbors continued with their routines, and the sun rose the next day as if nothing had changed. Only my house was different, full of all of her things and empty of her at the same time. Her slippers were by the bed. Her book lay open on the bedside table, with the page folded at the corner, waiting for a reading that would never come. The curtains she had sewn were at the window with that discreet embroidery she did while I slept on Sunday afternoons, evidence of the presence I had let pass unnoticed. I started talking to her. I know it sounds mad, but talking helped. I'd tell her about the tree in the backyard that was starting to ripen its oranges, about our neighbor Mr. Raymond, who had painted his gate green and it looked awful, about the weather being too cold for that time of year. She was everywhere in that house, and I needed her to know that I was finally paying attention. Then came the turning point, the thing that changed everything in a way I hadn't expected. One afternoon, while organizing her desk drawer to carefully store her belongings, I found a shoebox tied with a navy blue ribbon. Inside were notebooks, 5 black-covered notebooks filled with her small handwriting slanted to the right. I started reading, thinking they would be personal notes, recipes, observations about the garden. They were all of that. But they were also much more. In the notebooks, Daisy had recorded letters she had written to Edward over the years and never sent, and letters he had sent to her, physical letters she had taped onto the pages as if they were pressed flowers. Edward had written to his mother regularly for almost 2 decades, telling her about his life in London, about his work as a children's book illustrator, about the woman he had married, about the children I didn't know existed, 2 grandchildren I had never met, a girl named Iris and a boy named Julian. Daisy never told me. She knew I still carried the hurt from that argument with the same stubborn pride with which I carried everything in life. She knew that if I found out he had tried to reach out and I hadn't responded, guilt would consume me in a way she didn't want to impose on me. In the notebook she wrote, "Edward, your father loves you the way he learned to love. One day he will understand there are other ways. Wait for him." She was waiting for me. She had always been waiting for me. I sat on the floor of that room for hours with the notebooks on my lap, crying in a way I hadn't cried since I lost my father when I was young. a cry that wasn't just for her absence. It was of recognition. It was of an entire lifetime reorganizing itself within me in a single moment of devastating clarity. The next morning, I called Edward. It took 3 attempts for him to answer. When he recognized my voice, there was a silence that lasted too long and felt like an abyss. Then he said, "Dad," and I said, "Son." And we began to truly talk for the first time in decades. I told him about the notebooks. He cried. I cried. We talked for over 2 hours, and he told me about Iris and Julian with that fatherly pride I recognized because I had felt the same for him. We agreed that he would come to Brighton the following month with his family. I said I would clean the garden before their visit. He said Julian loved plants. I said, "Then you'll have plenty to talk about." When I hung up the phone, I went to the window and looked at the backyard tree for a long time. The same tree Daisy had called me to see dozens of times, and I had ignored. In that instant, I saw, truly saw. At 84 years old, I understand that I confused longevity with depth. I thought 59 years together were proof of love. They are. But love that doesn't manifest in attention, in presence, in pausing to truly see, is like a house built with a solid foundation, but no windows. You don't enter it. You manage it from the outside. Daisy left me a legacy within 5 black-covered notebooks. She never demanded that I be different. She merely noticed, understood, waited, and offered presence. And when I finally learned her language, I also learned to pass it on. To Edward, to Iris, to Julian, to you who are listening to me now. Don't wait. Don't postpone attention. Don't assume there will be another October. Love lives in ordinary days, in pauses, in unexpected detours, in glances that last longer than necessary. It lives in the instant you stop, look at the person beside you, and say, "I am here. I see you. I am present." It is in that instant that love becomes real.